Hey guys, Patrick Lewis with SoulWiggle. Today's episode is with Carl Lubbe. Carl and his family immigrated from South Africa. You're not going to want to miss this episode and hear how they got out, how their life in the United States was, and how they transitioned, and how Carl's gone through many life transitions from being in a band to coaching and organizational change and helping others receive their passion. Can't wait to share this with you.
Now, Carl.
Yes, sir.
First of all, I want to welcome you to SoulWiggle.
Glad to
We're
be
gonna
here.
Throw down.
I love it.
No real agenda outside
It's
of
my
a
favorite.
few questions here.
I mean, for anybody who's met Chris for more than 4 seconds, no, there's no real agenda. And if you set one, you're not sticking to it. So
I was told an agenda could help things, but we're not going to do that yet. So, first of all, how do we pronounce your last name?
Yeah, so my joke for the last 20 years living in the States has been, if you can pronounce it, I'll give you $1,000. So it's spelled Lubbe, but it's pronounced Libba, Libba.
Lubbe.
It's in Afrikaans, so nobody gets it because it's in a different language.
Well, what a great segue into your story is crazy. It was funny because I was kind of catching Patrick up to speed, because what happened was we invited you over to one of our sauna cold plunge sessions, the SoulWiggle one, and I think it was a Thursday afternoon.
My first cold plunge ever.
Yeah, and you crushed it.
Wow. Thank you for keeping time, because I was like, this needs to be over now. And you're like, easy.
But we had
big
about
fella.
16 guys there, right?
Yeah.
And from all, it was a very diverse group in terms of what they did, where they're from. And something interesting happened in the sauna, right? I mean, this is a big 16-person sauna that Patrick, on a whim, said, if you build it, they will come. And
Apparently we did. So thank you for building it.
Thanks for showing up.
Yeah, man.
Correct. But something amazing started to happen, because I think we ended up doing 4 or 5 sessions. And I saw in each one of those sessions, everyone was like, I need to sit next to this Carl.
He was a magnet.
Right? He was a
He
magnet.
was just like pulling everybody to him.
Yeah. And even Croy pulls me aside. He was like, dude, I think I just sounded for like 35 minutes straight because I just couldn't stop talking to Carl. But as I was talking to Patrick and bringing him up to speed, your story is truly amazing. So I think for those who aren't familiar with you, bring them up to speed to kind of current date and what brought you to the United States in the first place.
Yeah. So really quickly, my family was in South Africa, and my dad looked, kind of the American dream, and was like, hey, I want my boys to go to university in the States. So it's me and my 2 younger brothers who are identical twins. And so he's like, okay, well, how do I get to the US? And this is the late 80s in South Africa, and found a company in Central Africa, in a country that was then called Zaire, now called the Democratic Republic of the Congo, who was looking for a foreman for their foundry. That's what he did. He ran a foundry. And they said, hey, if you come and work for us for a year, one of the perks is, one of the benefits, we'll send you on a paid holiday anywhere in the world you want to go. And he was like, oh, okay, so we'll go there for a year. We'll take this paid holiday to the States, and I'll see if I can find a company who will hire us. So we go, and after a year, Dad says, all right, time to go on holiday. And, me and my brothers are like, where are we going to go? We've watched American TV. We've seen New York and LA and Chicago and Miami. We're going to go to Dollywood. That's where we're going. Because the only person my dad knew in the U.S. lived in East Tennessee. And so we had this great trip. We did go to Dollywood. I think mostly because my dad wanted to see their old-timey forge and foundry that they were running, because it was basically the same thing he was still running in Zaire. And this company hires him out of Knoxville. So my dad, we go back and we're all excited, like, oh, we're going to move to the States. This is going to happen. And he goes and tells the owner of the foundry, hey, I'm taking the kids and my wife and family, we're going to move to the States. And at that point in Zaire, it was a dictatorship. And the guy who owned the foundry was buddy-buddy with the dictator of the country. And he said, you're never leaving. And my dad was like, well, what do you mean? He's like, you'll leave when I say you leave. And my dad went, oh, no, I've made a massive miscalculation. Now, what was interesting at the time is Zaire, lots of, native languages, but it's also French. And so the only people we knew that spoke English were this local missionary group that we had made friends with in the last 6 months. We weren't believers. It wasn't like really kind of a part of our big journey, but it was like, oh, you speak English, we speak English, let's be friends. These missionaries found out from my dad what had happened. And that night, around a card table, they all pitched in enough cash for one-way plane ticket. And I remember pretty vividly my dad getting tucked under a blanket in the back of a cab in the middle of the night. And this cab drove him across the border into Zambia, and he flew from Lusaka to JFK. And the next morning, I remember like these guys showing up at the house to escort my dad to work because they knew he was a flight risk. And for me, it was really cool because they looked like a scene out of the A-Team. Like there's like the cutoff Jeep and the AK-47s, and like these guys meant serious business. In my mind, I was like, oh, that's cool. That looks like the TV. And my mom just said, he's already gone. And at that point, my mom even recently wrote a book about this, and we need to, get our stories together. I have no idea what their plan was. Because in Central Africa, at that point, if those guys had decided to put a bullet in my mom, me, my two brothers, and my grandmother, nobody's asking any questions.
Was there no worry at all that there was going to be retribution to the family?
It must have been, right? But it was also, I think it's one of those things that my mom does say in the book. She's like, Pete, you've got to go because you're our only chance of leaving. Like, we have to get you out.
Why did he not take all of y'all at once?
Because we couldn't get enough money. They had frozen all of my dad's accounts. So like, it was this very strange thing. Like we lived in this big, beautiful house. We had a driver and a nanny and a cook. Like my dad was kind of a big deal in the company. But when he'd come back from the States and there was a whisper that he was going to leave, they froze everything and they hadn't paid him for months. So we literally had no liquid cash to get out of the country.
How old were you at this time?
8. Yeah. And obviously most of this I'm finding out years later. But then what happened is over the course of the next 8 weeks, the church starts putting on yard sales and they're just selling stuff. And again, raised enough cash for another 5 one-way plane tickets. And so my last memories of Zaire are watching my mom open the window to the house and throw the keys in and then just close the window. And we had 2 suitcases and $100. And I got in one cab with my grandmother, same thing, under a blanket, and they drove. My 2 brothers and my mom got in the other one under the blanket, middle of the night, drove through to Zambia, and then came to the States.
Did this affect your ability to trust like higher ups or authorities or at any part in your life?
It's such a good question. So I ended up going on to get my undergrad in political science down here around the corner at Oglethorpe here in Brookhaven. And I've always had an interesting relationship with governments because in South Africa, the government that I grew up with was incredibly corrupt. It created this thing called apartheid. And like my friends were both black and white. My dad grew up in the bush in what was then Rhodesia and it was now Zimbabwe, and spoke, 10, 11 different tribal languages. All of his friends growing up with black. Most of my friends were like in, both white and black, and which was, fairly rare in South Africa. And so my thought about government was like, oh, they're doing bad things, but we need the security of that because my dad had been in Rhodesia, then Zimbabwe, where it fallen apart. I grew up in South Africa and it was busy tearing itself apart. And then I get to Zaire and it's always on the verge of civil war and literally doesn't exist anymore. It's now the DRC.
And then you end up in East Tennessee.
And then I end up in East Tennessee.
Like what?
Pigeons
Was
Forge,
that?
It's a great town. Did you ever go to Dollywood again?
Oh, we did dozens of times. My dad loved that place. 100%. 100%. So we end up in Knoxville, which is where the company that my dad had gotten hired by. Problem is, 6 months later, they had promised to do all of our paperwork and visas. Not only did they not do that, then they went bankrupt. So for the next 8 years, we don't have papers. And we can't go back to South Africa because it's falling apart. We're literally dead on sight in Zaire. And so it was one of those strange, wonderful things that a lot of my spiritual journey there was formed watching the kindness of strangers take care of us when they had no need to.
Wow.
So you're now, what age do you become a citizen? Or
I didn't actually do that until very recently.
Really?
And yeah, so we got our green card. I think my junior year of high school, all of the paperwork, because it takes tens of thousands of dollars and it's incredibly difficult. I know there's a large immigration conversation happening in the States, but it is not as easy as anybody is playing it is out to be. And so it took years and years and years for that to happen. But the lovely thing about my story and, when it comes to my dad is the whole dream had been, hey, let me get them into university. This is how you make a life for yourself in the States. And my dad died my senior year of high school. And just before he died, I got accepted into university and got a full ride.
Oh, no. How awesome.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so you got to have the full circle moment.
So now bring us to current state. I mean, I feel like I'm always learning from you. Like, I feel like anytime I'm around Carl, I'm like, I gotta write this down, right? Like, even in the kitchen.
Well, luckily it's being recorded now, so it's easy.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
But, I mean, one of the things that I love so much about what you are bringing to the world is this element of curiosity, but also giving people a playbook to tap into of tactics. So bring, I guess, listeners and people watching up to speed with kind of what you're doing and how you're helping people.
Yeah, just a quick preamble on that. So my journey just continues to be strange, right? So I finished my undergrad in political science and then got bitten by the music bug, which is so funny because my brothers and I didn't sing or anything when we were younger. And on the East Coast, I'm in college and I notice, hold on, there are all these really lovely ladies who keep on showing up in our dorm, our common room. And I was like, none of my roommates are particularly attractive or funny. Oh, it's the guitar. This guy keeps on pulling it out, playing a John Mayer song. And these lovely ladies keep on showing up. So during college, I was like, I can figure out how to play 4 chords and, badly sing a John Mayer tune. And from that, my brothers, the twins, were on the West Coast. And they had started to do the same thing, unbeknownst to me. And so we come back and we're like, hold on, you can play the guitar? And I'm like, hey, you can sing? And they're like, does anybody write songs? I was like, I've got 30 of the worst songs that have ever been written that I've been doing over the last couple of years trying to figure it out. And so we signed a little indie label a year later, and it was just this thing where instantly all of these crazy things were happening. Like we were getting to tour. I got major brownie points with my 8-year-old daughter the other day because she found out that I'd met Taylor Swift 10 years ago and had a great conversation. She's like, oh, so you were like a real musician, Dad? I was like, yeah, the Spotify or me traveling or providing a life for us, that didn't prove it. But me hanging out with Taylor Swift, that was the thing that was the cred
What kind of music did you guys play?
So when we signed with this little indie label, they were out of Nashville. So they wanted to make us like the South African Rascal Flatts because both my brothers have stratospheric voices. Like they can sing anything. And so we started off, but we wanted to be like Kings of Leon, Maroon 5. And also lyrically, my big influences were John Mayer and Dave Matthews and Damien Rice and these people who could really write a tune, right? And so we did it for a couple of years because in Nashville, there's hey, here's this guy who just wrote this #1 hit for Keith Urban. He's going to write the first single on the record. And it's okay, that's how it works in Nashville. And they were great songs. But the tipping point for the Nashville thing came when it was going to be my wedding day, and they needed us to be on a reality TV show called Nashville Star. And I was like, I can't. I'm getting married that day.
That was a great show.
Yeah, it was
Buddy Jewell was found off that show.
Buddy Jewell, Miranda Lambert, But and again, it's all of those things are just really interesting how they put them together.
Were you on the show?
No, because they were doing the filming, and they were like, and we were also having this real kind of crisis of career because we're this was before really Taylor had done the crossover thing, or obviously a decade before Beyonce did what she just did. If you were a country artist back in 2008, you were a country artist.
Yeah.
There wasn't a crossover thing. And so we were we'd made the label back their money, or at least I hope we'd made most of their money back. And we were looking to move on. My brother was looking to go to med school. The other one was really interested in doing design and wanted to move out west to Colorado. And so it was kind of this great thing where we were just I think this is the end of the road on this. And then I kept on pursuing it for another 7 or 8 years on my own as a solo artist after the one brother went off to med school and the other one went off to Colorado and had, medium success.
So if anyone listening wants to hear the band...
They don't.
I assume it's memorialized somewhere. You mentioned Spotify. So what's the name of the band and where do we go find this?
So it's funny. I think because all of the label had all the band stuff, all of that gets kind of Nashville shelved. So it doesn't really exist out there. They could email me and I'm sure my brother would have a link to it somewhere. My solo stuff ended up being under my first and middle name. So it's just under Carl Dillon, and Dillon's like Bob, Dylan.
I know what we're doing in the sauna after this.
We're going to put that on the turtle box.
The turtle box.
Yeah. So I do that, but to your point, where I'm at now, so I've got 3 different companies. So I've got a branding agency and an executive coaching company, and then a real estate investing company. And all of those things came about because I have this insatiable curiosity about well, Patrick, what's your story? And then I'd lean in there a little bit, and he's like, oh, I've got this company, and oh, like, Carl, you seem like a really gifted storyteller. We need some help with branding. So 10 years ago, that started to happen a lot. And I would go in and be like, a company is just like a song. Like, yours is just out of order. It's slightly out of tune. The hook isn't interesting enough yet. It's not repeated often enough. So it's not memorable. Like, when you think about, like, To Make You Feel My Love, like this thing, okay, we think about it from most recently, it's like, oh, Adele. And then before that, it's like, well, no, somebody will argue that was a Garth Brooks song. It's like, actually, Bob Dylan wrote that 50 years ago. And it's like, if the song is good enough, you can adjust it and rebrand it anyway because the message is so interesting. So 10 years ago, that's where that career started and, kind of birthed the branding agency. But then I'd get with somebody like Patrick or you or, Ben as he creates his companies, and they'd have staff. And then there's a culture that they're trying to form. And I'm around for a day or two. And about 4 years ago, I had one of these guys ring me back up, and he's like, what did you do to our people? And it's kind of like the joke you guys are making about the song. I was like, oh, I didn't do anything. You're great. He's like, no, dum-dum. They really liked whatever you did. And I was like, I don't know what I did. He's like, again, hey, dum-dum, I'm trying to pay you to come and do it again. So figure it out, and I'll be the guinea pig. I'll pay you. Tell me what it's worth to get your time. And so I went away and I got curious. I was like, well, hold on. If I'm unconsciously competent at this thing, how do I get consciously competent? And so that was the work over the next 6 months. I was like, oh, there's really 7 parts of any culture that are probably broken and need some adjustment. We don't set great expectations. It's the conversation we're having this morning, right? There are mismatched expectations about what we're wanting from each other. And so it creates this friction and this anxiety. It's the same in any company because it's just people. Or it's conflict resolution. How do you have the 3 A's of a hard conversation? We don't know how to get a great idea out. We don't know how to onboard somebody. We don't know how to develop our leadership or our people. So I went away and kind of went and cooked this thing in the shed and brought it back. And 6 months later, that guy had doubled the size of his company, and the reviews for all the employees was great. And I was like, oh, we're on to something. And then that has been really the main work of the last 3 years, is going, oh, that's the most fun. And so, like, our tagline for the company is, we make happier companies, because we get to go in and do that.
What's the secret to that, right? Because what I witnessed from you in the little short time that I've known you there, you ask questions that almost peer into people's soul, and then you listen. So I think you really make people feel cared about. And I think that's all anybody ever wants. And I think once people inside a company can feel cared about, then they'll do anything.
Yeah, I'll talk to CEOs regularly who are going, hey, Carl, we've got a bit of a money crunch, and we've also got a talent crunch. So how do you help us keep great talent or attract great talent when I can't pay another $100,000 on this benefit package to keep this great person? And I tell them all the time, it's the new car syndrome. And so the new car syndrome is this idea of, you buy a beautiful new car, you love it, smells great, all this sort of stuff. Statistically, it's about 90 days before all of that wears off. And all of a sudden now it gets its first ding. It doesn't smell as great. It's got, the first thing goes on. And what happens is, you're no longer thinking about this new beautiful car. You're thinking about the car payment just to keep it. It's the same thing when we give an employee money. For the first 90 days, that raise, that pat on the back, that thing feels really great. After about 90 days, they're like, I was always entitled that money. So now you're out the extra money and you haven't got the return on the connection. Whereas if I tell them, if you can give them what you just said, can you give them your presence? And then after that, can you help fix something that's really painful or anxiety ridden in their world? And so the first thing, the most precious thing Patrick has, Chris has, Ben has, or I have, is our attention. Even right now, somebody listening or watching, we are consuming your most valuable resource, your actual attention. So if you, as the leader, the power person in the room, can go, you have all of my capital, you have my full attention in that moment, and then you're being curious and asking them a new question, and then doing the most important thing. The most important question is the next one. It's telling somebody, oh, no, I'm not trying to fix it. I'm not trying to get to the end of this. You are valuable to me. You do that sort of thing, and you just unlock every single room you're in.
Well, it's hilarious because I don't know if you read the Wall Street Journal article last weekend around the biggest issue statistically is connection, right? And there was a recent Gallup survey, and it's super simple, the biggest takeaway, which is that the company cares about them as people, right? And it's not unlike exactly what we're talking about here, right? Which is be there be curious, and listen. And then that's where the magic starts to happen, right? It's this organic relationship that then begins to unfold as you go deeper. Now, one thing that I've seen with you is that race to authentic connection is a muscle that we all need to build. And you've somehow built this massive muscle, because I saw it unfold in the sauna. Because I mean, in our get-togethers, you've got people at all kind of stages of development, right? There's a lot of people in there that are pretty closed up, right? Or not a lot, but a handful. But what I was able to witness with you is that you almost talk about when you're sitting across from someone, how are you assessing where it is you go with the questioning, right? Because sometimes I'm very impatient. I'll just go, I say I'll throw the ball against the wall twice and it hits me in the face the second time. I just kind of move on to the next person in the sauna. Because I think I try to go there really fast because I'm impatient. But like, you have this persistence and patience that plays out. For those listening, how do you advise them in doing what you do? Right? With the right cadence.
So I think the easiest way to think about this is don't microwave the steak. Because that's what you're hoping to do when you're tossing the ball twice. You're like, I want a piece of Wagyu steak. And it's funny, in my life, I'm the worst cook in my life by 1,000 miles. I'm great at ordering, terrible at making anything. And I'm surrounded by incredible chefs. Like literally, one of my best friends lives in the south of Spain. He's the best food that I've ever eaten. And I've gotten to eat at, some pretty great places. And right now, actually this morning I was on the phone with my brother. They're going through some stuff over there and they had to postpone this amazing meal last night. And they had bought $1,500 worth of this meat, this Wagyu and this stuff that he has access to. And because he had sous vide it, he said, it'll hold, it'll keep. I can keep it for another day while we get through this crisis so we can still have the meal. And it's this incredible like metaphor that goes, if I'm not anxious for the result, if I'm not destination driven, but I'm journey driven, then everything has time and space to be there. Because you can't microwave the steak. And so a little bit of what you saw in the sauna is this idea that I don't need the destination. I'm enjoying the journey. So whether somebody reacts super open, like Patrick's super open, like he and I started talking, it's already clicking from 30 seconds in. Somebody else in the sauna might be going, I don't know you, I don't trust you. My thought isn't like, oh, you're somehow resisting my superpower of curiosity. I'm going, oh, where's the 8-year-old in your life? So my mission statement in life is I'm on a rescue mission for Patrick and Ben and Chris's inner 8-year-old. Like when we're 8, we're adventurous and we're curious, we're whimsical. Life is so much fun. If we think about, you and I were talking about some politics this morning. Could you imagine if a healthy 8-year-old version of our political leaders showed up in the world today and said, hey, I can instantly make a friend who looks different, sounds different, has different thoughts, came from a different place. And I'm going, what is possible? No, instead of this isn't. I've drawn all of these boundaries around my life. So I look at the world and go, and the 16 people in that sauna, like, what if all of us could be friends? And if that person is going kind of closed off, not really engaging, whatever, I'm going, something happened between 8 and now that has created this defense mechanism, that has created this sense of separation. And all I have is compassion for the 8-year-old version of them. So, I mean, I've had leaders before that have paid me to come in and coach and shut down and no, we're not going to do that. And I'm actively in the moment of the conversation. Anybody else would go, oh, now we're in a power play. Who can, swing the biggest power play in the room? And I'm going, I wonder what happened to you in the last 40 years that has made you react like this. Because it's actually not getting you what you want, or else I wouldn't be here. So how do I really love on that person well? How do I connect with that part of them that will eventually, whether it's in the next 30 seconds like Patrick, or the next 30 years like this person who's hyper closed off, who may not ever get there, but hopefully I can get them further along the journey by being curious. Because the idea there is, in order to be interesting, you have to be interested. Mm-hmm. And what I want everybody to walk away from me is not going, oh, Carl was interesting or whatever. No. Carl made me feel interesting to him. Like that's the kind of presence that I want to have in their life.
What are your first go-to questions when you meet someone?
That's another great question. So to set that up, I think you need to understand two things. Humans are physiologically, psychologically, neurologically, emotionally wired to do two things and to need two things from each other. You need to be able to celebrate pleasure and you need to be able to carry pain. And so if you're going into a conversation and you're only thinking two things, what's their pain point? What's their pleasure point? You do this really well with like a resting joy rate. You instantly go to pleasure. How do we increase it? Amazing. We need that. I would tell you that 90% of the world, because our brains are hardwired for scarcity, fight, flight, or freeze, it's protective, can get to pain 15 times faster than they get to pleasure. This is why your work is so important. It's like, hey, it's a slow road to get to pleasure. I need the guy with the neon shoes and the hyper cool speech and the engaging thing that says, come with me to pleasure. And they're like, nobody's ever led us there. Yes, please take me. But what I would tell you is most people are already pre-wired and predisposed to do what? Complain. Like, how many people in your company, Patrick?
350.
How many times would you say you've sat down and you're going, oh, I'm going to hear a complaint first?
Can I plead the fifth?
Yeah, 100%.
Let me take this. Yeah, that's the bulk of the conversations that I have.
Yeah, because it's how we're neurologically wired. They're not trying to be a Debbie Downer. You are wired to go, is Patrick or the company or the world trying to eat or kill me? Like this is evolutionarily wired in us. And so in that moment, Harvard, does these great studies, this little school called Harvard, and they recently came out with this thing that says the number one indicator of a company's success and their talent success is the presence of psychological safety. And so our role as a leader or as a human, because that's all this is personal interactions, is can I create a little bit of psychological safety? So if Ben comes to me and starts to complain, he doesn't even know he's doing it. Oh, the car's acting up and it's doing this. And if I just go, I am uninterested in that, guess what? I'm uninteresting to Ben. But again, if he's kind of opening up about something, all I have to do is react and go, is this a pain or a pleasure? And if it's a pain, how do I carry it? I'm going to ask a question around that pain. In the sauna, a lot of these guys were predisposed to like, hey, I'm having this bad thing happen. Your buddy Croy that you mentioned. Hey, I'm going through a hard thing. I don't need to know 1 ounce of the details to go, man, that sounds really hard. So how is that affecting you currently? Okay, then they go, oh, and then what does this mean? Okay, and then they go. But here's the difference between that and like a therapist. And everybody needs therapy. I'll tell everybody, like find a counselor, find a therapist to help you walk through some stuff. But what I want to do in those questions is go, how do I viscerally carry it? Not how does that make you feel? Oh, that's really tough. I would feel, and not make it about me, but say, hey, now I'm in you. If somebody could know something, all right, my favorite question around this is, what do you wish somebody knew about that situation that is difficult for you? This is going back into our 3 A's of a hard conversation. You acknowledge the difficulty, you affirm their effort, and you ask what's their win. In acknowledging the difficulty, the really high level question is once they start sharing, hey, the Alfa Romeo is playing up again. I know nothing about cars. I love it. It's a beautiful piece of machinery. But if I'm going to actually be in the conversation with Ben, a great question is like, hey man, for a car dummy like me, what's one thing you wish somebody else understood about how difficult it is to maintain a piece of machinery like that? Like, what would that do to Ben? It's like, oh, Carl has expressed he's an idiot when it comes to being a petrol head, but he's interested in the thing that I'm interested in. And now I get to like almost exercise a little bit of that grief, a little bit of the pain. And then he feels better. He feels more connected to me. And then we keep on going in the conversation.
Well, and one thing you do so well is you don't go in and say, this is what you need to do. Right. And I think so often we want to help others and we want to give advice. Yeah. And it's actually like, no, don't do that.
Yeah, that helps people feel safe. So for those listening that are leaders or managers in a company, how do they balance the two things of listening and making their people feel cared about and providing empathy to them but yet still meeting the demands of their job, where they're responsible for KPIs or goals or all these things. What's the percentage of time they should give to both? Or should they really say, hey, you know what, I'm going to go all in on listening and caring and showing empathy to my people, because that in turn is going to give the results there, and realize that may be a little bit of a longer game to get there.
Yeah, and you've already answered the question brilliantly. It's the math on it for people. I tell them it's 90-10. And I tell people, because I like simple language, you have to feel it before you can fix it. And feeling it's 90% of it. Fixing it is 10% of it. Because if you have talented people in your organization, very rarely do they actually need you to fix it. They're just going, nobody else is listening to me. And I tell people, you vent up and you lead sideways and down. And so if you're the leader and you have somebody who's coming to you going, so say you're an executive and you've got somebody in middle management, 9 out of 10 times, they're just needing somebody to feel the weight of what they're trying to carry, but they have acumen to go and fix it. So if you're like, hey, I've got 10 minutes for us to have this meeting, I would tell you, make 9 of the meetings. Hey, and by the way, I would tell you, don't ask, how's it going? We teach a tool around clear language. Hey, with the thing that you're up against, are you comfortable, stuck, stressed, or growing? And we literally put it on a matrix. So in 30 seconds, they can plot where they are on this SWOT analysis of how the thing is going. And then immediately you as a leader go, okay, and very quickly, the tool basically breaks out on a scale of 0 to 10. Do you have the resources you need to do the job or to accomplish this thing? Give me a 0 to 10. Boss, I'm at a 3. Okay, at a 0 to 10 on the matrix, where are you in terms of you understand the value or the priority or the urgency of it? I'm at a 9. Okay, all of a sudden, I've just plotted them at this part of the stressed quadrant. So I know immediately, not, hey, how's it going? Because this is the fear of any great leader whose time is precious, right? Is if I ask them how it's going, Carl, they don't need 10 minutes. They now need 3 hours, right? And I've just burnt $10,000 in like revenue creating energy and momentum because I couldn't get them in and out. You need the tools to have the conversations quickly. So, this is where people like me come in and go, let's help you shape the language and give you tools for these soft skills of how do we get through that moment? Because now I don't need to create any more urgency. You're already stressed out enough. I need to ask, what 2 or 3 resources would you need from me in order to meet that expectation? Or do we need to adjust the expectation?
It sounds like you just gave a really good resource on how to run a meeting with someone.
That's it.
Those
Right.
few
Yeah.
things. Yeah.
Yeah, I go in and I teach these 7 tools all the time because I like the principle of feel it versus fix it, or be interested in order to be interesting. But I'm also an incredibly practical person. I worked in a foundry with my dad for 8 years. That's why I've got the big scar on the back of my head, because I almost died in one. I understand, hey, we have to heat this metal to this degree in order to pour it to make this thing happen. If my dad had had a feeling conversation with me while we're pouring molten metal, all of a sudden I don't have 4 toes because the thing's going to go through. It has to be the mixture of both the emotional intelligence and the data-driven IQ stuff that actually moves the revenue needle. But they both have to work in harmony, because if my dad had been screaming at me in the foundry, all of a sudden I'm not present to pour the molten metal out of the crucible, and now stuff's going to go really sideways. But if I didn't have the practical understanding of how we're going to do it, I was going to mess it up just as equally. So it's the yin and yang of both of those things.
So one of the things that Patrick and I talk a lot about is this idea of responsible reinvention, Carl, right?
Ooh, I love that.
You've responsibly reinvented yourself. Like if I were to kind of chart out your journey, you were this musician, and then you transitioned into more of this branding creative guy, and then now you're building this consultancy / speaking around curiosity, and then you also have your hand, like it seems so nonlinear, and I think so many leaders either struggling with themselves asking, is this really what I was meant to do? Like in 3 years, if I'm still doing this, have I done what I was put on this earth to do? How do you encourage people to do the things that make their soul wiggle, right? But then also to stay responsible to the course and the currency that they've been able to build up. How do you manage that with clients and people and friends around you?
Man, guys are full of great questions. So I'll give you the line that I use for myself and then for all the companies that I have and the ones that I coach. And this one question has probably made me more money than any other question. And it's this: what problem do I want to be known for solving? And you can use that as micro as, Ben today gets up. It's like, man, problem I want to, it's like there's great video, great audio, great lighting, all this stuff. That's the problem. But it's hopefully connected to something larger of like, I want to be telling better stories out in the world because it's beautiful and it's worth doing. So it's asking that question of yourself and being okay with going, it's maybe not answering the biggest question today, but I can answer that in some small way for myself or a friend or a family member or a colleague. Because what I see the tension of, a middle management or an exec person that I'm sitting with, it has having the sense of like, I'm not where I'm supposed to be. I'm not doing the thing. If you can start answering the question like, what problem do I want to be known for solving? And for me, curiosity is the problem. The lack of curiosity is the problem. I want to be known for solving. When I exit this planet, I want to have left a wake of curiosity and whimsy and adventure of people going, life is exciting until I draw my last breath. If I'm in the mentality to go, well, but Patrick's very interesting. Let me be interested over there and be curious. And, oh, look at these new things I learned and the new experiences I had. Or you're walking through your business and going, what if today, even though I've been running it for 35 years, I looked at it as if it was the first time? How curious could I get about this person? I'm doing this last night with my wife, where I'd been gone in Dallas for 3 days. She'd felt like we do a really good exercise around, it's not balance, but it's order that we're pursuing. And she was like, hey, I'm just feeling like disconnected. And she's feeling upset. And in this moment, I'm going, don't make any assumptions. Like, we've been together 18 years. I have lots of assumptions. I have lots of history with this woman. And I'm going, be in this conversation for the first time. Really hear what she's trying to say. Don't imagine what she's saying. Don't connect it to 14 other conversations. Try and hear it for the first time. And in that moment, she comes alive to me in a way that, and she hasn't had to do any of it. This is all happening inside my own head, my own heart. And so in this space, when we're in relationship, because all life is connection, all life is relationship and people, we were designed by community for community. And so if I can look at my profession, if I can look at my people, if I can look at my purpose, all around this idea of curiosity, then it can come alive. So even if I'm the factory worker and going, Carl, I'm listening to you, and this is my lot in life. Okay, but how do I look at the factory line as if I've never done it before? How do I look at the guy who's sitting next to me on the line and going, we've had the same conversation for 15 years. How could I ask a different question? All of a sudden, the places where maybe I have to be right now can come alive in a different way. Because again, it's journey versus destination.
Yeah, the interesting thing for me, I don't want our viewers or listeners to miss is you took something you were passionate about at a young age, music, songwriting. And then you found your purpose later in life that you just went through. But you were able to tie the two together. And I was really talented at something that I was passionate about. And how do I take those tools and adapt it to this totally new thing, right? You went from songwriting to telling a story at a company is essentially writing a song. And I think that's where a lot of people go wrong, right? They have this passion and they have trying to figure out their purpose and they go, well, I don't know how to do that. Where if we really take the things from our passion that we solve problems in that all the time and make it into our purpose, I think is where they could be super successful.
100%. And the Japanese culture has a word for this, and you guys may have already talked about it. It's the concept of ikigai. And so ikigai is this idea that all life is 4 circles. It's what you're good at, what you can get paid for, what the world needs, and what you're passionate about. And if those circles can continually start to merge over each other, where those Venn diagrams cross over in the middle, that's like your purpose. That's the thing where you're like, oh, this is where all my zest for life comes from. Because like in my world, like what you said, what I've been very fortunate to figure out is it's not just what I'm good at. It's also what I'm passionate about. It's what the world needs, and it's what I can get paid for. So even if you remove the paid for thing at this point, I would still do it for free because I'm so passionate about it and I enjoy it and people need it that I'm showing up. And this is the arc we really see also in most of human life of anybody who's been successful. Once we get the basic, because in the States now, the math is basically like, if you can get above $250,000 a year. I know that's a massive amount of money, but this thing that the culture has been taught, or we've been shown over and over, is like, hey, if you can just make more money, you'll be happier and happier. There's this interesting drop off after about 250,000 that it goes, you're not thinking about survival as much anymore. And you start to see the rates of anxiety and depression skyrocket with people who are making now 250 to $1 million and then over $1 million, unless they've found some purpose to attach themselves to. Because they thought it was, oh, if I can find provision, I'll be safe and happy. And
it doesn't mean like going off and starting your own company. You know, I think one of the massively negative impacts of what social media has done to everyone is that it's created this archetype of the only way to do it is to just do it on your own as an entrepreneur. And more than 50% of people are not wired to be entrepreneurs. And if you were to ask me the same thing a year ago, or a year and a half ago, I would have probably been more optimistic, but I'm like, don't do it. Like, stay where you are. And at the same time, actively pursue these things that light your soul on fire. That's responsible reinvention. And I think so many people, my issue with Ikigai is that like everyone, I mean, there's a pillbox now branded Ikigai. I'm like, what? Like, you're now branding this as a thing. Know how you're wired. Before you start pursuing that thing, but more than anything, know what it is your purpose is, right? Otherwise, you're just put a stake in the ground, and then also understand your wiring, right? Like what are you inclined? Are you high autonomy or low autonomy? And then how do we pair up and use connection to create a masterful team instead of asking yourself to be all things to all people? And that's that responsible piece, and why I'm so excited about what we're building together with SoulWiggle.
It was so stunning to be in that thing last week.
Well, explain.
So kind
of what went down.
Yeah, so I get this invite from Chris to be like, all right, show up here on Instagram. And I'm like, Chris is very short on details, and I'm not a hyper detailed guy, but I'm like, I'm gonna do what he's like, bring a towel and some shorts, and we're gonna do sauna and cold plunge. And my first thought is, I might be in for the sauna, but the cold plunge is going to be a real ask. And then I show up, and I must have been a couple of minutes late because everybody's already laid down doing a Wim Hof breathing exercise. And I'm like, hey, I'm an all-in sort of guy, but I don't am I interrupting? Are we having a meditative moment? Yeah, in your driveway. And there's, 10 men all laid on their backs, just breathing into the sky. And some part of me was like, man, I just love where the world is going. Like, there's none of these dudes' dads would have ever done what they're doing right now. And I love I love what we're doing in this moment. And so, but then I get to start to meet everybody and then, chat a little bit with Patrick, and you telling me about, SoulWiggle and the ethos and the idea behind this. And I'm like, we need tens of thousands more of this. And so I felt like, oh, you're at the genesis point of something really, really interesting. And that's what we talked about afterwards, is going, how do we multiply this thing in the most organic way? Because people, and, in our context, specifically men, are going, we don't know how to connect. We don't know how to be in a space where our soul has some movement and where somebody can talk to me about revenue and my employees and the thing that I'm up against and the loneliness that I'm combating and the marriage that I wish I had and the kids that are struggling, and have a place to go, oh, you can actually carry this, but actually influence it and help it in the right direction, as opposed to, yeah, we're just going to talk about it for 3 hours. And I left feeling a little hurt, but there's no movement either in my soul or in my life. And so I think the really beautiful thing of what you're talking about in there is in staying in the places you are. I couldn't agree more. Because for a lot of people, they've built these deep relationships and they're like, I need to leave it because I haven't found my purpose. It was like, part of the purpose is in the people. One of the things I coach leaders all the time, the hardest thing I will say to another leader is just, you have to wrestle with the fact that people don't leave positions, they leave people. And if you can create an environment, if you can create a culture where they're like, I don't want to leave any of these people, then they will they will produce better, they'll stay longer, they'll have greater enjoyment because you're connecting them. And I think the great companies of the next 30 or 40 years will be hyper interested in, how do we create your own sense of fulfillment, your fulfillment on the team, and then what we're doing. Because we run a branding exercise where we call it the purpose pentagon, where you're attached, your role and responsibility is attached to what problem do we solve as a company? How bad could that problem get if it gets elevated? What is our unique solution, both you and your team and the company as a whole? And then what results are we promising? Again, both to you as an employee and then the clients and the people that we serve. When we can do those sorts of things, people will stay forever, both with us relationally, because all of this, it's not just business. Like, you know, the line, hey, it's not personal, it's just business, is the stupidest line ever. Everything is personal, everything is relational, everything's connected. So if we can, in our company, we joke and say, we teach people how to people. If we can teach them how to connect with each other, the revenue takes care of itself. It really does.
The interesting thing for me is everybody's after purpose, and we all talk about it, right? And what's my purpose? I've never met anybody that has found their purpose and it's not about serving others.
100%.
Everybody's purpose is to serve others. You just got to figure out what your talent, what your platform is to serve others.
Exactly.
So even if you're in a job that maybe you don't necessarily like, I don't think this is where I'm supposed to be long term, go ahead and practice serving those around you in that position. And that's going to help you really define long term where that purpose of serving others should take you and where you should be with it.
And another great question around this, because it proves your point, and I'm pretty sure this is Simon Sinek's question, is to get around a friend and ask them this very vulnerable question. So you have to be ready to hear the answer. Why are we friends?
Yeah.
And when you sit with this, the first response, oh, Patrick, you're kind, or you're funny, or I like you. Be like, yeah, but everybody's that. Why am I your friend? Why did you choose me? And then let it get awkward. Be like, oh, man, pass me a beer. Let's turn on. Hey, man, I really need to know. And maybe you need to like take some time, but I need to ask you as a friend. I need to know. Man, get me emotional thinking about it. Like, why are we friends? Why do you continue to pick me? Why do you continue to show up? And what you'll notice, and this is what happened with me with curiosity, is like I had done some version of that. It wasn't as succinct or brilliant as Simon's, but I was like hearing from my friends, like, I never feel, and these moments should happen around your purpose. It should resonate that deeply. It should make like, I'm experiencing SoulWiggle right now, right? It's making me emotional. I would have friends go like, I felt alone or unseen or not connected. And when you're around, I don't feel that. And so in those moments, I'm going, oh, like, how do I do more of that? And so people don't need to go like, what's my purpose? Let me take an online quiz. Like, get with somebody who knows you and ask, like, why? Why are we friends? And then in that moment, see where that leads you. I mean, it's leading Sawyer somewhere. He got a purpose.
Chad just came in. And like, I've been so in this. I'm like, I don't even know what time it is. But it's almost time for our sonic cold plunge, Carl.
Yeah. The sauna pads, I'm all in, but I'm still not converted. I'm so grateful. It's giving you guys lots of support, like lots of like positive reinforcement. I got out of that thing and I was like, you guys wired different than I am. It's so impressive. It's so impressive.
So, Carl, for just to kind of close off on how people can connect with you, what's the best way to connect with?
Yeah, so there's two ways right now. So the website's just getmorecurious.com. And there they can find all the consulting and the coaching and all of that fun stuff.
Getmorecurious.com. It'll be in our show notes.
Yep. And the other one, we've just launched a digital version of me. And so like, I really wish I had 1,000 hours a day to give away to as many people, but we realized for me to scale, I needed to have something where like a company could say, hey, we've got 350 employees. I want all of them to get a taste of this. So I went away to the shed again for 6 months and took all the stuff and we created the videos and the training and all that fun stuff. And you can go to curiosity.training to find that stuff.
Awesome. Well, thank you for doing what you do.
Thanks for the invite, man.
This was amazing.
Yeah, likewise.
So good. Sawyer's ready.
Yeah.
Sawyer's ready for the sauna.
Yeah.
I love it. Awesome, dude.
All right,
Awesome.
thanks, man.
Good work, brother.
Appreciate it.